Hey everyone, how's it going? This video will go over how to stay organized as an occupational therapy student. I guess it can apply to any like college work or grad school work or any other program as well. With that said, let's get started. So the first thing to do when getting organized is to decide whether you want to go digital or physical. So digital meaning like files on your computer, or physical meaning like printing out paper. Now, of course, this isn't like all one or the other, as most like content these days that you get in lessons from school are more digital. You can completely go digital, but some people like to like have paper, right? Like take notes on paper or review on paper, highlight, right? So that's a very good way to like learn. So you can print things out. You don't have to necessarily go one or the other. You can kind of do a hybrid approach too. So if you want to like maybe just print out, for example, when a test is coming up, you can just print out your study guide and review with that while your like lessons are like mainly digital. So that's one example of a hybrid approach. I personally like having everything with me. So I think the upside of going completely digital, and I'll talk a little bit about this later with the cloud, is you'll be able to have everything with you. And that's nice because if you want to review while you're on the go, like you're like waiting in line or something in a waiting room, you're like at a gym, you know, you can study this way much easier with digital. Downside of digital is you kind of have one screen at a time, right? So most of you will probably be working with a laptop, so you have limited screen real estate. Compared to in real life, you have a tabletop. So, or however, like let's say you're at the library, you can have like the whole entire desk, right? And spread everything out. And so you can like review more things at a time. And it's more, I think you interact with it better. It's just not like flat, right? It's three-dimensional. You can kind of have like spatial awareness of where things are. So I personally liked studying that way in the past, you know, like having a textbook out, having a notebook. However, you know, more things are going digital these days. And especially if you want to like save paper, then you might want to lean towards that. So everybody has their own kind of styles, preferences, and this isn't really the intention of this video. It's more of how to stay organized. So what I'll be talking about for the digital part will actually translate to physical. So let's get right into the digital part. Main point of this video of staying organized is backup, right? To tell you guys a horror story, I had an OT classmate who in the middle of one of the semesters later on, they spilled coffee on their computer and they completely lost all their files. Nowadays, this is completely avoidable. It wasn't like back in the day, you know, where there wasn't even like, I remember autosave didn't even exist and we had to have like backup power, you know, like with our like desktop towers, you know. Nowadays, there's autosave. Nowadays, there's a cloud. So my number one recommendation for staying organized is to put your school documents all on the cloud. So this can be any service. If you're using Apple, it can be iCloud or Dropbox, Google Drive, Microsoft, whatever you want to use. They all come free and they all have like pretty decent amount of storage. I think, I forget how much Google gives you, but it's like many gigs. And that's a plenty basically, you know, PowerPoint files, PDFs, photos, they're not going to be big. You know, the only reason you're going to be using up so much space digitally is if you're saving like literally like videos. And like, even then you don't even need to do that because if you're like watching things on YouTube, you can just save like the link. There's no real reason to archive videos, so you shouldn't run into storage issues. And another tip is if you're part of a university that offers you like the Google suite of services, like the Google Drive, they may actually provide unlimited storage. So that's what my school offered. And we actually, while I was a student, I had unlimited storage and I put everything on there. I didn't even have to worry about running into storage issues. So I guess I don't have to go into the reasons why backup is so important, but as a student, the last thing you want to do is lose all of your files in like the middle of the semester and have to start all over. And some files you cannot get back. Let's say you're working on a capstone and you're doing like a transcription or something, right? Like you lose that, it's like game over, you know, you have to start over and like interview your like participants, you know, so you don't want to do that. So back everything up. With that said, of course, you want to follow like HIPAA and like storage, privacy things for like that particular aspect of research, but that's a whole nother thing. But in terms of like your general school documents, put it all on the cloud. So how are you going to stay organized? So I'm going to show you my screen of how I actually literally stayed organized with my actual school documents. So let's get right into that. So as you can see, I'm on Google Drive, and this is my folder for my school for all of my courses. And I have a general documents folder, and basically I organize it. Whatever makes sense to you, I do it by semester. So I go by semester, and then within that, I have the courses I take for that semester. So for example, in 2015, in summer, I took my conditions and OT course. But for me, it made the most sense to go by week, because every week we had a new lesson. You can also go by like lecture, but I think weeks actually makes the most sense because one, it's chronological, and two, it's easy to like reference reference back to your syllabus. Usually your syllabus goes by week, or like lesson by lesson, right? So whatever makes the most sense for you. And then from here, it's pretty like intuitive, right? Like, so let's say in week 1, I put all of my files in here. So what would you put inside the folder? I guess is the big question, right? The most obvious is your PowerPoint slides, right? So most likely your school is going to provide you with PowerPoint slides. Maybe some teachers might not provide the PowerPoint slides. That may be a different case. But if you have them, just put them in here. So along those lines, how do you stay organized with taking notes, right? This is just going to be a quick one, not go real deep into it. Some people like to take notes on their computers, right? Some professors may not allow you to have a laptop, so you may have to do it on paper. If you do it the paper method, what you can do as a tip is you can scan it with your phone, like take photos of it and then upload it into your folder. So that's really nice because you can primarily study again, like in your real like notebook, like on paper. Do I have some here? No, but what's also nice is like if you're like in the car, like waiting, or you're just waiting around, you have downtime and you want to like review like something that's in your head, you popped in like, oh yeah, like what was that thing that I learned about? You have it scanned in your folder in your cloud drive and you can access it anytime. So that's the benefit, even your phone. And that's nice because if you store files only on your laptop, you're not going to be able to access it on your phone or your tablet. But if you put it in your drive, and especially if you enable the offline feature, if you have like spotty coverage, you can access it 24/7 as long as you have power. So that is one benefit. And with taking notes digitally, some people like to type directly into the PowerPoint section. So that's what I did for the most of my OT school career, where I, in the PowerPoint program or whatever you use, most likely it's Microsoft PowerPoint. So that's really nice because you can kind of sync up your notes with the slide itself. If you were to print it out, some people like to print it out in, some of you may already know, you can print it out in like the note kind of format. So it kind of has like, I think it's 3 slides per page. And then on the right, it has like underlined blank lines for you to take notes side by side. So that's also pretty cool because it is synced up with your PowerPoint slides itself when your professor presents. And one benefit to taking notes on paper is you can draw and like mark and like, scribble over like the images. Whereas if you're typing, you're kind of just limited by text. Now I know a newer kind of a solution, which is kind of like newer to me, is tablets. So sometimes I think you can even like draw on top of your like notes and stuff on tablet, like on an iPad or something. This is kind of like a newer kind of space I haven't really explored, and it wasn't around when I was a student. But that is another option too, kind of like a third hybrid. Instead of typing your notes, you can kind of write with your tablet. And actually my wife did that in nursing school and she found it very, very beneficial. She used the app where she could pull up her PowerPoint slides and then just do any type of writing or drawing or highlighting on it. And it's pretty cool because you can like quickly go in the toolbox and do like a highlighter or like a pen, or like draw shapes, and like it's kind of limitless depending on the features of the software. And along those lines, I just thought about recording, right? So should you record your lectures like audio? So this depends on, again, your school's policy, what your actual specific professor is comfortable with or allows you to do. So if they allow you to do it, what I've seen people do, students, is, they use your actual phones and you just use like the audio recorder on there. Or you can just record it straight from your laptop, like where you're sitting, with permission, of course. With recording audio, what you want to do is you want to get the microphone as close to the professor as possible. So if you're going to sit in the back of the room, you're going to get terrible audio. You might be able to make it out, but it's going to give you a headache just listening back to it. So that's one tip. And even though it takes a little bit of work, put your phone up in the front. And that's also nice because it minimizes your distractions. You're not going to be tempted to like look at your phone because, well, you don't have your phone with you as you're taking notes. That's nice because it's kind of like a podcast kind of thing, right? You can like listen to the whole lecture again, like in long car rides or while you're folding your laundry. And that's another resource for you to supplement your studying. You know, are you going to have to necessarily re-listen to all of your like lecture notes like in real time? No. And by the way, you listen to it fast forward too. So that's another pro tip. Probably not. It depends on, you know, like what you retain. So for some courses where it's like more difficult, let's say the subject matter or the topic of the lesson is more difficult, and it's nice to have an audio recording. But it's not the end of the world if you aren't able to get the recording, you know, for every single lecture and that kind of thing. In terms of like what to write down, right? I guess the common question is like, should you write down everything the teacher says? And what do you retain better, right? So studies have shown, I believe, that when you write notes, it's better for retaining and learning. But for me, I like typing because I'm like really fast. My words per minute is like super fast compared to my writing ability. And even then, like my legibility isn't that great, right? So I personally think it's not necessary to write everything down, especially because if it's like ready, like on the PowerPoint itself, it's more of like the main takeaways, the main points, like the nuggets, you know, in like the key takeaways that you should be writing down, stuff that isn't in the notes itself and stuff you don't think that it's in your book, insights, and just like really deep concepts. And another way to take notes is to just like kind of paraphrase, kind of like, because when you're writing, you're kind of forced to paraphrase anyways, because you can't write verbatim what the teacher says, you know? So just like kind of rephrase it in your mind and think about it and then write it down in a way that makes sense to you. And another tip is you don't have to necessarily record everything or write everything down because you can compare notes with your classmates if you have like, you missed some things. On that note, should you do kind of like a group note-taking thing? That's kind of interesting. I started doing that towards the end of the semester, kind of like when the topics were like lighter and they weren't as like, you know, difficult, you know, with like a bunch of like guy friends in my cohort, like we went on a Google Doc and we all like logged in at the same time and we started taking notes. And actually I enjoyed that because it was like kind of like a social experience. And two, it kind of like relieved the pressure of having to write like everything down. We kind of like, you know, took notes on what we thought was important. And then you would think that this would be like really, really messy. I guess it depends on like the style, the person you're working with, and like how many people were involved. But I think it worked really well and it might be worth trying. One downside to that is it may be a distraction, right? Because you can like kind of like see each other type and it may distract you. I didn't think that was a problem. So just a pro tip you might want to try. Another thing is, well, how do you organize your folder, right? But obviously it's whatever files that are included for that week that are important. So whether mainly it be supplementary reading materials and like research articles. That's one thing I regret not saving as much as like the research articles that were shared with me or that were mentioned in like the discussion or like even cited. It may be worthwhile to like download those research files. Of course, there's that limitation of you having a paywall and you may not necessarily be able to get the majority of the research articles, which is kind of why it's nice if your professor downloaded it and they shared it like with that week, you'll be able to save it and it's provided to you because it's not a copyright issue because it's for educational purposes and it's provided by your instructor. And that's important to keep because you're not going to be able to access that particular like research article and reference it later when you're like, you're no longer a student. I think I have mainly PowerPoint. So let's go into more of what else I have. Of course, you will have major projects for your class. Let's say you have a group project and you would make a folder for it. But this is where it gets kind of confusing because if you're doing collaborative work, it may be on like the cloud, right? Like you may do like a shared Google Drive or a Google, what do you call it? What do they call it? Google Slides. So that's also why I mainly did Google and use Google for the cloud because you see how you have that shared with me folder. It's easy to collaborate and you have everything in one place. And that's what most people do because they use the Google Suite for the Google Cloud, you know, Office software. That can help minimize like the splitting of the files and keeping everything in one place. So here I am in my Foundations of OT. So it's one of the more introductory courses that you take in the beginning. As a student, I use the same folder structure, right? So I went by week and I had the important folders. I don't even remember what these are for, like projects, you know, theory papers. So papers I had to write. Okay, so that makes sense because for papers, I probably had to like have like, okay, drafts, you know, and maybe like supplemental material. So it's also helpful to organize even like within that. Yeah, you know, like I have citations, like EndNote, like, let's see in here. So a whole bunch of stuff. Oh, I used to use that citation software stuff that nowadays is kind of limited. You don't have to use that. You can use Google Scholar. You don't have to download a software to download like the reference and then like use a separate program for that. Some of the librarians encouraged using that, but I don't know if that's still kind of like taught in like as a good practice. But if you're writing papers, overall, it's a good way to stay organized with your references. I went over, like the weeks, so here, let's say this is week 2, it's the history of OT and like the PowerPoint. And here I have like a worksheet that was provided to me for the PDF. How do you quickly access your files? You can do search in your drive. And this is nice. And this is within the browser, right? And if you synced it up, these files to your computer, you can do a search for your computer itself. So with Mac, it's called Spotlight. So I believe the command is command spacebar, and that pulls up a search box for you to quickly do a search. So that's Spotlight search command space, and I use it all the time. For example, if I quickly need to pull up my occupational therapy practice framework, I don't go digging around in my folders and that like takes up time. I quickly do a Spotlight search on Mac, type in OTPF, and then it's the first result that pops up, and I hit enter, and then I open it right up. On Windows, you can do a very similar thing. You can just hit the Windows key on your keyboard and just start typing away, and it'll search up the same kind of way that you would do on the Mac. Next is, well, what else do you have in the folder? The syllabus I didn't go over, but that's very important, right? You're going to regularly want to reference the syllabus. And one way to stay organized with the syllabus in the beginning of the semester is to kind of like have your all assignments put on a to-do list. So here are some to-do list apps I used. I don't remember what it was called. It doesn't even exist anymore. But, find a to-do list app or a similar kind of like software that allows you to have a broad overall view of your task, like your assignments, your test dates, projects, deadlines, when the semester begins, kind of like a calendar. So you kind of want to have like a calendar and a to-do list. Calendar to show like obviously like the deadlines and when the semester begins, and the to-do list like the actual assignments. And this can help you a lot with anxiety because, it's like you can feel overwhelmed with like in the beginning of the semester, like I have like so many projects, or like towards the end of the semester, like what is due, right? Having a checklist is very, very helpful. So this is the digital method. Now, a lot of classmates actually used planners. So like, for example, our school, like for, I forget which like office or like group or club or whatever, but they provided us with like planners like every semester even, or during the beginning of the year, like for free. You can just go and grab it, like if you're a student, and then it has like your calendar in there, and then all the way down to the date. You've used it. You guys all know what I mean. It's like the organizers have, you can write assignments that are due in there. And that's really helpful as a visual and to stay organized. So I highly recommend either having like an organizer planner or going digital. Downside to having a planner is you always have to have it with you. So if you like forget it at home for some reason and you go to class, you're kind of like, you have to like write it on a sheet of paper or something and then add it in. So if you lose that planner, that will suck. Versus digital, you won't necessarily lose it because it's synced up to the cloud as well. The last thing you can have in your folder are your study guides. So this is a pretty important one. Like when you have exams, you're going to create a study guide, either like yourself or you're going to do it as a group. And when should you create the study guide? Should you do it when like the night before your test? Like probably not. It's probably easier. And some students they gave me this tip is to actually, they start creating their study guide like right away. So when you start reviewing for your lecture, you make a study guide out of it because it makes the most sense. It's like what you learn, you understand it, it's what's in your head, what's the most important. You create kind of like an outline on it on a study guide so that by the time it's like your exam comes up, you just have to like do like your most recent lecture, and then you have everything there. You don't have to refer all the way back to the notes unless you don't understand a specific concept or something. And then you don't have to like spend a lot of time doing it. And just in terms of like cognitive energy, it makes a lot of sense. You don't have to like dig around and search around and like re-listen to your lecture, where it's like basically you have to like listen to everything from beginning to end, versus like if you make your study guide, like, and you're like reviewing your lecture or audio recording, that like the first like 15 minutes is like kind of like a discussion and it's like not really important. It's not gonna be an exam. You can skip it, you know? And so while it's fresh in your mind, it's better to do it right away. Yeah, it takes more work. It's gonna be like, you have to stay really organized with it, but it's gonna pay off at the end in terms of like the amount of cognitive energy you spend, your time spent like having to like review every single thing and relearn everything and like see what's important. And third, it cuts down on anxiety. So I think that's like one of the goals of staying organized, right? It helps reduce your anxiety. So making your study guide early is key. And I mean, other documents, it really is kind of like self-explanatory. It's what you think is important. Now, should you put everything in this folder? Sure, why not? You know, if it helps you, but you don't have to go kind of like crazy doing it either. The key is to stay organized and not be very, very like disorganized. I had a classmate and, you know, he did really well in school, but like his desktop had so many files and they were like so messy and they weren't even in folders that his desktop, I kid you not, had a scroll bar. Because he has so many files there. I don't even know how he kept everything together, but it worked for him, right? Another tip is you can also color code stuff. I didn't necessarily do this, but let's say like courses, right? Like I can give it a color or something like that, like make it red, you know, then like have a system in place. So maybe like all my lecture notes are red, right? Most important. And then all my PDFs that are like supplementary reading are like blue, right? And then like green is for like my study guides. And this can come in really handy because come time to look for things, you know, besides searching by file name, because that's another kind of level of thing. When you download files, it might be called like lecture and then with like bracket 1, 2 copy, number 2. So on that note, when you download files, name it something that makes sense and then have a kind of like a structure or like a system in place that makes sense to you. So if it's called like, let's see here, see, I did a search, newborn system. So that's the first thing that came up, oral development. So what's also cool about having things on the cloud is it searches within the document itself. So infant reflex probably popped up within the document, even though it's not the file name itself. But it makes sense to name things that make sense to you. So call it maybe like lecture, right? Because even though file formats will be like .ppt for like, or .pptx for like PowerPoints, you might have like different files. And these days, like everything is in PDF, right? Your lecture notes in a PDF format. So you can't necessarily go by file format, you know? So you want to name things, or at least have a way to differentiate it from all of your other like hundreds, thousands of files. So you could call it a lecture at the end, or you could go by color coding, or you can tag it. So like, I don't know about Windows, but on Mac, I know you can tag stuff, you know, kind of like give it like a hashtag tag thing and call it like anything you want. And from here, you can type in a name and you can create a tag and even give it. So you can get like really, really like super hyper organized with it. The last thing to help with organize and anxiety is it's often easy as a student to live in a bubble, right? When we're studying, we study like solo, you know, and I guess what I'm trying to say is try to compare notes. So you can like share notes with each other, whether it's digital. If it's paper, you like snap a picture, send it to them, or, you know, these days you don't have to like lend someone your notebook. Just snap a picture to them. The files that I need the most, or the books or resources that I need the most accessible. So like the occupational therapy practice framework, I like would want that on my like main folder, or like label it so I can easily open it. Because you're gonna open that file like all the time, you know, so, or like an OT dictionary, or like things you reference, scales or like definitions, have those files easily accessible, or those books or like notebooks easily accessible with you. So beyond that, staying organized is actually a skill, you know, believe it or not. It's not like we're born knowing how to organize. You kind of have to experiment. So try different things, see what your classmates are doing, you know, and maybe try some of those techniques. And don't be afraid to experiment one semester, and you may be surprised. It may like boost your productivity a lot more. So you don't have to like stick with one method if it like gives you stress and anxiety, you know. So there you go. There you have it. Hope this helps. And let me know in the comments, you guys, what do you think helps you guys? What has helped you as a student, or if you're a current student, what has helped you? What are some kind of pro tips that we can all learn from each other for OT school out there? Thanks for watching.